to only come up when you're setting your levy or going to referendum. From one year to the next, but then also from this period of time, June, July, and August, when you are kind of approving or thinking about referendum dollar amounts, and then when come November, some of those final variables are just that, actually final, and what might have changed. We will also talk about other district budget variables. You will be able to kind of recall some of those key terms, and then understand where else we can go to gain some additional resources to help. Since I fully expect this will be an ongoing conversation, as well as I sure hope that you interrupt me if there's anything that you'd like me to explain again or explain differently as a part of tonight's presentation as well. So with that, we dive in. So the first kind of school finance essential that we consider is really that total school levy. And we start here because the levy is what gets distributed to the local taxpayer. As you all have likely seen on your tax bills, you've got a portion that goes to the city, town, or village, maybe a technical college, and then the local school district, and that's often the largest portion of a homeowner's property tax bill. So oftentimes we want to know how that's computed. So this number is made up of a few separate levies. So the revenue limit tax levy, which is driven by a formula that we will explore in the next couple of slides. The referendum approved debt levy, community service tax levy, and then this one is a little bit more unknown and underutilized just because it has to do with how people pay their taxes on time or late. So not a lot of districts kind of see this one. So all of these together make up the total school-based tax levy.
Which means, what does that total school levy mean? Is that our funds available?
Essentially, this is, in each of these buckets, all of these have different dollar amounts that kind of make up this total number. So this revenue limit tax levy is formula driven, and I'll explain that one in the next slide. But then you add this one to the referendum approved debt levy, which Raymond doesn't have anymore, but used to, and that can only go towards paying back debt service. The community service tax levy is Fund 80. It's a separate levy, and that one is also kind of outside of that revenue limit formula. And all of these get added together.
Right, and we don't
to make up that total.
We don't get that?
We don't have it yet.
We would like, one of our goals is to establish that.
Where does that come from?
It is money that we would levy for using, if we would do any kind of recreational programming that the district would run.
Okay.
Versus the city or the village, because your village doesn't have it either. But if we set up something, or we're using this building for like a senior card night, or opening up for a variety of different things, you could create a Fund 80, which we have the ability to do, we just haven't done it. And so in the future, you may see that.
These would be incoming funds.
Yep, incoming funds. But it's not a huge dollar amount. We're only talking probably a couple $100,000. So, but it's money that if you were going to do that, it doesn't come out of your school funds.
So is
correct? It's separate. It is an additional tax. So
yes,
it would still be distributed to the local tax base, but it's for a completely separate purpose. It would not go towards the general fund, the operating fund of the district. It would go towards what Jim just described. I have districts who use it for their pool, who use it for their community weight room. It's really meant to serve the community.
Yep. The wraparound program, is that a possible thing to
it
throw
could
into
be.
Fund 80?
If we
It
open
could
it up
be,
to
if
non-Ravens.
it's opened up to, well, no, not to non-Raymond. If it's
No,
opened up,
non-Raymond students.
it needs to be open to the had people that were going to a different school
Right.
district, but they reside here in Raymond, they could,
Still use it.
they could
Okay.
use it.
Okay.
Bird walk, sorry.
That's okay. We get that question a lot actually because, you know, districts like to know, do we use this? And what are some examples of things that will be eligible? Because schools are inherent parts of their communities, so. So all of these together make up that total number. Did I answer that question okay?
So that's our total income,
Yes,
basically.
the total taxes, everything that we would tax.
Yes.
It's not our income, because we get
Taxable revenues.
money from
Tax
DPI,
collection
which is
revenues,
separate.
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. And that revenue limit levy is really oftentimes the majority of what this total school-based tax levy will be. So that will make sense when we kind of dive into that formula. We take that levy, we divide it by equalized property value. That is different than assessed value. And most homeowners on their tax bills see assessed value. Equalized value gives us the ability to compare to our neighbors, and equalized value is computed annually as opposed to assessed value, which is completed whenever you're assessed. So you take that, divide by the district's total equalized property value times 1,000 to get that mill rate, which is what school districts like to use to compare. What is the size of our levy proportionate to our local property value, and then that's how we compute that mill rate, which in Raymond this year is a little bit lower than it's been historically.
So that property value is all of Raymond, is that what that's telling me?
Yes.
655 million,
it's all,
as an example?
all of the people in the district,
Okay, oh,
not the
okay,
entire
okay,
community,
got it, got it.
because we
Yeah.
would cover the whole community.
Are those our numbers?
Yes,
Okay.
Yeah, so
Oh,
that is
good.
the Raymond school district boundaries, which, you know, can split in municipalities, sometimes it makes up entire municipalities. So that is the boundaries of the school district.
so that value is about almost $700 million.
And if you wanna take a look, I have, so Josh from Northern Ozaki, he had run the historic mill rate analysis, so if you wanted to see over time,
She has
she's
it.
probably got it in there as well, but you can see over time how it's shifted and changed, I think it's an important
look
thing
at
to look
that.
at, yeah. It's almost like she did homework, look at that.
Can you imagine?
So this helps us know what goes into that total school levy, just like you had mentioned before. What number, what goes into that? And as you'll see, the majority of it is the revenue limit. It's that light blue bar that you see from 2015 to 2024. The district previously had referendum approved debt, which was Fund 39, referendum approved for the purposes of capital projects. So this is different than the operational referendum that the school district is considering. The operational referendum will fall within the revenue limit and therefore will fall within this light blue chunk of the bar. So that may come up, you know, the district went to referendum, you know, back in the past. This is different. This is going strictly towards operating the district, which means staff, benefits, electricity, gas, water, heat, etc. So differentiating between referendum approved debt and a referendum for the purposes of operations may come up.
Can I just jump in here real quick? You notice how in 2016, there's a small chunk, when we get to 2021, we have this larger chunk? Really what you'd like to see on that is to see it all be smaller, and it would have gone out further, and that drop wouldn't have been so significant.
Didn't we pay off early?
We did.
Yeah,
And
right.
because of that, and you had no other debt, that's why your mill rate plummeted, which is, then becomes a bigger hurdle as we're doing
To bring
this.
back up.
Yeah.
So the real opportunity would have been to pass something when the debt falls off.
Yep.
Which we tried.
A lot
They
of,
did.
correct,
Yeah.
correct. A lot of districts will do that strategy because then it maintains.
Oh, we
the
did try and
ability.
fail?
Yeah, we tried to, yeah.
What was that for?
It was an operational referendum, that was the blank
No.
check.
No.
Or not,
it was
I'm sorry, capital, that was the blank check
lost 58 to 42.
150 votes, yeah, or something.
All right, thanks, Elise, sorry.
No, that's okay. Knowing your referendum history is important as well because it helps you dispel, what these dollars are going towards. So I think you had mentioned that the 14.8 back in 2022 failed. So the one that passed was for 4.6 million back in 2014. That's the additional debt that you see coming on in these years here. Okay, so because that was a capital referendum, that's a separate bucket, it goes in a completely separate fund, it is taxed separately, which is why it has its own little color on our bar chart here. So, as Jim described, ideally, for your community, you'd like your taxes to be as stable and predictable as you can make them. However, many of the variables that go into the calculation of this mill rate are beyond the district's control. For example, you cannot control, there we go, you cannot control your property value within your school district boundaries. And as we will come to kind of discuss further, this revenue limit tax levy, a lot of the variables that go into that are also beyond the district's control. So when you can, via your Fund 39, control the size of your levy so that your local community can expect tax bills that are like this, as opposed to like this, you try to do that as best as you can. However, at this point, the district has prepaid their debt, which is, that's a good thing. That's it like prepaying a mortgage. If you have the opportunity to pay it down sooner, you'd like to do that, and then the taxes will reflect that. So that is definitely something to be celebrated then. So we talk a lot about revenue limits because they make up the majority of the district's operating budget. So when you mentioned before, is the tax levy equal to our revenues? It's not equal to your revenues. However, the revenue limit portion of the levy is the largest chunk of the district's general fund operating revenue. So if we're thinking about all those different buckets, the revenue limit is one, and it makes up, in Raymond this past year, 62% of the school district's operating revenue. So that's the largest chunk. And the reason why this other is so big in 22-23 is because of ESSER revenue. And most districts are seeing this. As ESSER sunsets this upcoming September, you will typically see most districts, their revenue limit revenue, it falls between 70 and 90% of their operating budget. So we talk a lot about the revenue limit. We focus on it very heavily because this is the majority of the district's revenue.
What is the typical Fund 10, go back, can you? In other school districts, Fund 10 for us is right around almost 60%. Did you talk
this year?
Did you talk about that a little bit? I mean, is that typical? Is it high, low, average?
This year, it's a little bit lower than most districts. Most districts will fall between 75 and 90%. I'm trying to think, I just did a presentation for a district for their 24-25 budget. Once these ESSER dollars go away, so that's a good chunk of this 2.3 million here. Once their ESSER revenue goes away, that's going to shift. For them, they were 76%. Most districts are going to fall in that range. And the only outlier that I could think of would be if your district is heavily open enroll in. So, for example, I live out in Delafield, and there's a lot of K-8s in the area that people open enroll into. So, Lake Country, for example, are heavily, like 3-to-1 ratio, open enroll in versus open enroll out. So that open enrollment revenue makes up a good chunk of their budget, and that would fall in this all other bucket.
Now, the operational referendum, that will be under a Fund 10, or is that a different bucket?
Correct, that is Fund 10,
Okay.
general fund. So that revenue limit that we've been talking about is driven by this formula on the slide here. So school districts in Wisconsin are limited or capped by the amount of revenue that they can raise through the sources of state aid and property tax. So basically this formula, this calculation says this is the most that you can earn through these two sources. Okay, so we take your district membership, excuse me,
What's that called?
times,
Your pupil count.
Membership is.
Resident
Number of
pupils,
students.
right, resident pupils.
full-time equivalency. So yes, that's an important distinction. The district membership does not equal enrollment.
Correct.
District membership is not butts and seats, which is the term I like to use. It's instead your butts and seats minus your open enroll in plus your open enroll out times a slight proration for kindergartners who are not counted at full time. They're counted at usually 0.6.
Oh,
So that is what, when we talk about membership,
Is that new math or old
it's
math?
head count minus open enroll
EDI math.
plus
No kidding.
lots of formulas. So we take that resident membership, as you mentioned, times our per pupil dollar amount, which is set by the state, plus any one-time or ongoing exemptions, such as a non-recurring or recurring referendum. So this is where you see that operating referendum enhance your revenues to increase your revenue limit authority. So districts typically cannot control their membership because, you can, Jim and Mike can get out on the road and do a road show as much as they want in order to get more kids to come, in the door, but there's only a certain number of kids in the state of Wisconsin. Districts often don't have a ton of control over the state biennial budget, which is our second bubble. It's that one-time or ongoing exemptions bubble that allows school districts to seek additional revenue and authority from their local tax base. This is where you say, we would like to enhance our revenues, we're asking our taxpayers to support our district and approving this additional tax that goes into our operating budget.
What is that typical per pupil dollars number?
This is.
So,
Or am I getting ahead of us?
no, it's okay, that is a great question. It's different for every school district across the state, and it was established back in 1993. So it changes, since 1993 it has changed, because the biennial budget is giving additional funds, has given additional funds to K-12 education during that time. But it's different. So Raymond's per pupil dollar amount will be different from your neighbors. And so that's the other, when people think about how to make education more equitable or how to make education seem more fair from one district to the next, this is a number that a lot of districts focus on. We receive $1,000 less than our neighbors, as an example.
So like Nicolay High School is sort of its own beast down in the Milwaukee area. And they're at like, what, 15,000 per pupil. And their communities agree that that's what they want to spend per pupil. And then right next door, you could have a district that's spending 10,000 or, well, now the minimum for it's is 11,000.
What do we spend? Do we know?
11.
11.
Okay.
So the floor was raised last year, if I recall. It was raised up to 11,000. So that's the new starting point.
Right. It's called the low revenue ceiling, which I think is a little ironic because it really is the floor. It's the
It's not a ceiling.
minimum maximum amount.
Yes.
And who does set that? Is it DPI, the state, or is it the school? You just said Nicolay set their own.
Well, the floor is there as 11,000, they choose to tax their community more in their local taxes to increase the amount their kids get. So
But they wouldn't go below 11,000.
They won't go below 11,000, and the state,
Right.
the biennial budget, I think doesn't it, set the floor?
Correct. Yep,
So
so in fact,
So-
in 1993, that per pupil dollar amount was set for each district. Revenue limits were set, established in 1993. And everybody was different, and all districts were doing different things. So that dollar amount was different for everyone, and then it gets increased via the biennial budget, or if you pass a recurring referendum, which is what I think Mike is referring to. So if you pass a recurring referendum, you can increase that per pupil dollar amount in perpetuity.
So if we were to just say, for example, Raymond says, we don't want it to be 11,000, we want it to be 12,000. We can't do that? How'd Nicolay get away with it?
You have to
Yeah,
pass a
right,
recurring
right, right.
referendum
Referendum.
from your tax
Nicolay
base.
Gotcha.
Nicolay passes referendum all the time.
Right.
Okay, all right, all right.
And the big one, I don't know if we can say the word here, but Milwaukee Public Schools, they just passed the $252 million forever recurring. So that's the big well, part of many big controversies, but that's a big part of it, because that's a blank check for $252 million for
Recurring.
recurring, for forever, or until.
Right.
Sounds like everybody's hitting the same bucket. Why don't the state just bump that up? All of the day.
That's
Big one.
That's it, you've been here, that's
And you
it.
don't have to worry about referendums and stuff. Okay, all right,
Yeah.
carry on, I'm
So,
sorry.
Elise, can you answer this question? Before Tommy Thompson put this formula in place, how were the schools funded?
They did, we were able to choose our own, and based on our needs, so we would do a budget. And we would say, well, we need this much money for this next year, and so we would be able to go and levy that. And the problem was that, like, Nicolay would always levy more, because their folks could do it. And little old Cudahy could only go so far, because we have to keep in mind what our taxpayers could
Yeah.
afford. So we never were able to do that, so prior to that, that's how that operated. And then when they put in the formula, those districts that were already ahead, and correct me if I'm wrong, Elise, but if they were already ahead, that number got based on that formula. That's why Nicolay is also ahead, it's because they always had more money
So if
all
you were
along.
pretty conservative managing your books back then, you kind of got,
Screwed.
yeah.
Yeah, if you were a district that really did a good job handling and taking care of everything, you didn't come out ahead. And
You weren't an
this all
egregious
came in.
spender, yeah.
Well, and some districts were reducing during that time, some districts were growing and building.
Yes.
And so those who were growing and building might have had a higher per pupil dollar amount than a district who might have been, losing staff or having some attrition issues. So
Correct.
that was 30 years ago.
Wow. I dated myself.
So then how do we increase and, why doesn't the school just give more, or why doesn't the legislature just give more to schools? That has been kind of Jim can probably speak more to the role of the superintendent as advocates for school funding. It's a big part of what superintendents do. They try, and school boards too, try to advocate for more money going to schools and in the right places as well. So that's why, presentation like tonight is so helpful, because it helps you learn the language that if you were to, do more advocacy, you know exactly what issues are unique to Raymond that could help. So we have our revenue limit authority. This is the maximum amount that you can raise via, this formula. And then there's a portion that the property taxpayer pays, and there's a portion that the state pays. And that's different across all districts as well. So if we're thinking about the first piece of that bubble, that district membership, that is driven by this FTE figure here. Now we've got a graph that shows kind of what that FTE has done in Raymond over the last 10 years or so. So going from 332 FTE back in 2015 to now 315 FTE in 23-24. So if we're thinking about the formula, if one bubble is seeing a downward trajectory, it stands to reason then that the amount of revenue we can raise would also go on a downward trajectory as well. So there are some parts of the formula that allow districts to kind of soften that decline in enrollment, since most districts across the state of Wisconsin are in declining enrollment. And that's this kind of orangish color that you'll see here, and that's called the, declining enrollment exemption, or the hold harmless. So it allows you to lose students, but then not lose, $100,000 if you've just lost 10 FTE. So a lot of districts are grappling with this issue statewide, just because people are not having as many kids as they used to. So the most important thing about revenue limits is that that is that largest chunk of your operating budget. It's controlled by the state. It's calculated by the state. It's driven primarily by the district's FTE. And then whatever happens at the state level helps to determine what those additional larger buckets of funding may be. So that also will have an impact on that tax levy, right? So if the revenue limit is that one of those buckets that makes up the total school-based tax levy, we like to know exactly what's going on inside.
I just want to clarify for a resident means students that are coming here that are residents of the district.
Right.
That's what that resident FTE. So it's a 3-year average.
Oh,
And it rolls so that every year it's another 3-year average based off of this year, last year, and the year before. And what she was talking about is that so that you don't have a massive downplay, there is a hold harmless, and that helps you so that it kind of softens the blow. Ultimately, you still are losing kids.
Yeah.
But
is that very similar to the district membership?
yes,
number?
it is.
That
Absolutely.
is that.
That
number.
is that.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
well, that makes sense, and let's make it go there, okay.
But then enrollment is different because you can
Understand.
enter in open enrollment families.
Right.
And there's open
But this does
enrollment
not
out and in.
include.
No, it does not
It
include.
does not.
That's right,
So for
that's
an
the
example,
district
we have
membership. Got it.
about 305 resident district students right now.
Okay,
We have another approximately 100 open enrollment students.
okay.
So that takes us up to just about 400. That's when we say we have 400 kids. That's how.
All right. Now it's making sense to me.
And then K-4 is funded because it's a half-day program separately, that's why it's
Gotcha.
0.6.
Yep, that I got.
So that total revenue limit authority says, okay, here's how much you can raise via this formula. The state then says, okay, well, based on your property wealth per member and your spending, here's how much the state will contribute to the school district of Raymond. So as you can imagine, that is also different from one district to the next. So, for example, Door County school districts, they have high property wealth per member, and therefore their local taxpayer, the greater majority of their revenue limit authority falls to their local tax base, as opposed to the state contributing a portion.
They get barely,
On the flip
basically, no aid
Okay.
or little aid because the property is worth so much. And they are able to generate the funds. Cudahy, on the other example, we got a boatload of aid because our property values are so low. So,
Yes.
and in Raymond, your property values are
On
up
the
there.
higher side,
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm.
It's the same where our house is up
Based
north
on
too.
property
It's
values.
all lake property up there.
Yep.
And,
Right,
they
lake
get-
properties throw a lot of neighborhoods
Oh
off.
my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they are just crying,
Ours is just
Yeah.
wrong.
you know, for state aid.
Yep.
Or just people with
Thank you.
And state aid is, it's important to understand that state aid does not provide additional revenue. Instead, it simply shifts the portion of the levy locally or to the state. So we already know how much revenue we can raise. The state then says, well, we can contribute this portion, and then the rest is gonna go to your local taxpayer. So it doesn't increase the bucket, it just shifts around who pays. So in Raymond, this breakdown is 35% of your revenue limit authority is covered by the state, and 65% is covered locally.
That's the revenue limit levy number? What number was those? 55% local, or what?
That slide you have it. Yeah, right there.
So that revenue limit levy represents that 65% that's gonna come to the local taxpayer.
Oh, she said 60, 55, I thought.
I heard 55.
So we are locally 2/3 funded.
Well, we have older ears over here.
Locally, what did you say?
We're locally 2/3 funded.
And that was a goal of the state legislature, was to enhance 2/3 funding, which essentially would help local property taxpayers kind of see less of a burden from their local school districts. However, as I described, that's on average across the state. Districts way up north, they're on lake properties, or the lake will have higher property health and therefore won't see as large of a contribution from the state. So this is Raymond's breakdown, and it doesn't give any more or less to spec. It just says who pays. The next critical piece of kind of planning for current and next year is the need to forecast. So Raymond has a forecast model, and that's how we are estimating what the district might need in the future. It allows us to kind of say what happens if we lost another 5 students in the next 5 years? What happens if the state contributed more to schools? What happens if our property values go up? So that's the really nice thing about using a forecasting tool, and it's a critical part, I think, to planning ahead. Now, we obviously have a forecast model at Bayard, and there are other companies that do it as well. I think that it is one of the most important things the business office should be utilizing on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis to help plan for the future. So that you can say, we were thinking ahead, we kind of had a plan for this, and this is the best information that we have at this point in time. It also allows you to communicate about when those variables change, which we have the ability to say, remember when we talked about, or we suspected enrollment might change from now to September, and we had a tool that showed us how. So it's a critical part of kind of the school finance equation, and so I just kind of wanted to call that out as Raymond looks ahead and continues to move forward. Next, and you all have gotten a master class, I think, on the budget this year, right? And learning kind of the different pieces of it and the pieces that changed. Okay, so kind of just knowing what is the district's approximate budget size, right? What are our typical revenues and expenses, and what have they been in the last 5 years? These are things to help not only you can identify if 1 year or 2 are outliers. So specifically, a lot of districts, when COVID hit and districts saw additional federal revenue, those were outlier years. A lot of districts saw additional revenue as a result. Additional expenses too. So knowing that in a typical year, our school district would spend or when earning revenue is an important piece of kind of being equipped. Knowing your fund balance percentage, and then knowing if you have seen a trend in surplus deficits in the last couple of years. The budget model can obviously help. You guys have a tool that can help you know some of this information. So even if you're still learning, there's plenty of time. So also understanding how these budget changes, specifically this year, putting it into perspective. So the district we're not talking this year about $100,000 swing, but just knowing that what that budget change represents in the grand scheme of the district's total budget, I think is helpful as well. So I think this year is a little bit of an outlier, but looking ahead, kind of knowing what percentage of our budget goes to salaries and benefits, what percentage of our budget goes towards utilities, what percent of our budget as it relates to expenses falls within our control as opposed to outside of our control. Fixed costs versus variable costs, what can we control, and what does it represent of our total expense budget? Because as you consider approaching your community for additional revenue, it's likely that the question will come up, well, what have you done on the expense side first? Or what does your expense budget look like? So here's a snapshot of the district's 22-23 audited fund balance position for Fund 10. So the district ended last year with about, you add all of these 900s together in order to get around a $900,000 fund balance at the end of 22-23. I just talked to Patty today about running a new estimate for year end for the current year. When we spoke, the district was in the process of pursuing a state trust fund loan, which is going to change how you end the fiscal year currently, and then continuing to examine current year expenses in order to see where it fell, compared to the budget. Now, in a typical year, you would expect to see budget to actual variances. This year is an anomaly, as we kind of acknowledged. There's a few reasons why. But in a typical year, so next year, this is what we're putting out into the universe, next year is going to be a very typical year. And as a result,
You're screaming.
a bird flew into the window, a puppy child.
Happens everywhere.
Okay, so back on track. Next year, kind of understanding what is the cause of our budget to actual variance. So right now in another district, I work as a part-time business manager. They're adopting their budget amendments, and I'm explaining why the budget came in our case slightly better than expected, and in what areas. So understanding where that would fall in a typical year, I think, is one of the essential parts to kind of understanding the budget. So here's an example of the district's Fund 10 history, and then the district's fund balance over the last 7 years. So the district has always kind of fallen between 10% fund balance and 18%. Now, we often get asked, what is the ideal fund balance percentage to have? And that is a school board decision, and it's different in every school across the state. So Jim, I don't know if you can speak to Cudahy's fund balance policy, but everybody's a little bit different
Yeah, our
and
goal was,
decides differently.
yeah, ours was 25%. So,
Cudahy's
and
was?
we very rarely were there. We usually were most likely between 18 and 19%. A couple times we got a little bit higher, but, it's hard to get there.
Our last board meeting, I think we said we wanted to be around 20%.
Yep, and that
Voted
was
as
our
like a
goal.
reasonable.
The goal is around
Yeah.
20.
Around 20 and stuff, yeah.
In some districts, their policy so we don't have to spend money on borrowing costs. So that percentage is different in every school district based on the timing of when you receive your revenues from the state. So that's this next slide here. I think, so unlike a home budget,
Very stable.
Yeah, very stable.
right? Right, exactly.
This is
Very
how we get
predictable.
paid.
Boy.
Yes. So unlike a home budget, schools do not get a bi-weekly paycheck, right? Instead, the timing of those revenues depends on state allocations. And then that is often the cause of school districts' need to cash flow borrow. So it's June now. School districts will receive a state aid payment at the end of the month in June. And then you receive a little bit of tax levy revenue in August. You receive a tiny chunk of aid in September. And then you kind of have to make it, as you can see here, our revenues until December, which is the next time that the district receives its larger influx of, in that case, it's a state aid payment.
That's when the state
So-
aid comes, is December?
And it comes
All
at
of it?
different times. So
No,
December,
just a portion.
it's
Just a portion.
a portion, I think
Oh,
it's
that's
33%.
Duh.
Yep.
And then, March and June. So that's why you see that go way, way up at the end there, because in this case, this district this is an example, but very heavily aided, they receive a large inflow of cash. So that changes when school districts may need to cash flow borrow.
Do we have a trans note with any lender? Who's ours with?
Local bank,
Okay.
yeah, but it's $1 million. So, yeah,
I'd like to lay this over our rate of expense. You know, on top of this.
well, that's what that
That's
other
what this is.
little line is. And I can tell you, this is the area right here.
Oh, really?
Pretty
Yep.
even.
This is the area right in here that we have to go do the short-term borrowing because we're running short on cash. We've got to make payments for,
Oh, that's
the teachers like to get paid.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we get our state payment and then we kind of equal out. And then we have to be concerned again
At the end.
at the end of the year.
But that's not us.
No, this is an example.
Correct.
But this is,
This very close, ours
This
is
is
very
similar.
close.
district cycle
to what-
of life.
Well, because I would say that come January and February, our expenses would be higher due to heating and all of that, and snow removal.
Yeah, but a lot of that we're able to, and again, that just kind of averages out, but yes.
Oh.
And we could land up showing you, Patty could put that together pretty easy to show you where our,
Where we are monthly.
exactly. Yep.
Because I can't believe that it's that level, but,
Well,
okay.
and that may be like in Cudahy, we had our heating, we were in a program
Budget building, yeah.
where we budgeted, we bought an allocation of heating of oil or gas, natural gas. And we were able to purchase that, but every month, no matter if we heated or not, we still had the same payment.
Right.
And then we were hedging against funds. We don't do that here, but it was pretty complicated. But that allowed us to remain as stable as possible so that we didn't have
flat.
as much peak and valley. But there's still a lot.
And there are tools you're probably aware of, but also finance, buildings and grounds, our finance, or buildings and grounds committee here can kick the tires on some of those programs that are out there for energy efficiency metrics. And Ozaki put in new meters from Badger Meter in every nook and cranny, and they were all provided for by a company. The company then helps you regulate your numbers, and it looks at energy usage and consumption in your building and peak times and valley times. And there's a lot of technology out there that I would assume that we don't have here
Well, there's a
yet.
ton. There is a ton.
And you're aware of it from work too,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah,
there's, I think we can really dive into some of that work too, long-term, to start to strategize
For
around.
monitoring and,
Yeah,
yeah, oh, I agree. Okay. Again,
We're back.
So that was kind of my last school finance slide, but it's important to understand the difference between, cash flow and fund balance. They are not the same. Fund balance is not simply money sitting in the bank. It's the result of a formula. It's the district's assets minus its liabilities. So fund balance oftentimes, there's a misconception that, you know, the district has $900,000 just sitting in the bank available to draw. And that's quite frankly not the case. At the end of the year, Patty's gonna do some journal entries that say, you know, these are the taxes still owed to us, these are the federal grants still owed to us, these are the things that we still need to pay out, these are the other expenses that we still have. And as a result of that assets minus liabilities, that is the district's fund balance. So it's not just cash on hand, which I think is an important distinction as well, especially as you kind of head into operating referendum.
It's basically, at that moment in time, it is cash on hand, but it's earmarked for future expenses.
It is not cash on hand. It is a representative of what the district has. So some of it is cash. So in this case, this is the district's 22-23 snapshot. So as of June 30th, at the end of last year in Raymond, there was 1.5 million cash on hand. That is an asset, but it's not the only asset. Other assets that the school had were taxes receivable, so still owed $850,000 in taxes, not liquid cash. 963 in accounts receivable due from other governments, which could be school districts or the state, and then still had yet to pay. So those are the assets. The liabilities, represented by the eighth digit in front here. The district still had to pay 1.2 million in temporary notes as a result of that cash flow, that timing of state revenues and expenses. Still owed 8.7 in accounts payable, other salary and benefits payable yet, which results in then that almost 900,000 in what was reported as the district's fund balance. So because it still had yet to receive revenue and then had to pay out a handful of liabilities, that $900,000 then represents the district's fund balance as of June 30th.
So,
Do you understand that?
and so we'll walk through it again, but this is the basics of some of the stuff you need to know. It really, if you think about it this way, it is like at the end of the month, when you take a look at what money you have left in your personal finances, what do you have left, but what do you still owe? So, you know, if you have, you know, $50 in your checking account, but you still owe your brother $22, you really only have, your net assets are only 28.
Right.
So that's really how this kind of plays out. And the fund balance, and what's really important about all this is that all of this stuff is the same in every district. So it makes it easy for us to compare to other districts and see how we're doing, as well as the state to take a look and see how we're doing. So that's all part of this unified.
How's that presented to the state? Like this right here? Is that the document?
Pretty close, not quite the document, but in essence, this is fairly close to what they're getting.
So,
But see,
Yeah, so
is
this
that
is,
available to me or whatever,
Yeah.
or us, whatever?
Yes.
yep, that's from the DPI, so you can kind of head out to the DPI website. I can show you where to find and where to access that information. So this is 22-23. The district's all prior year and audited financials are all available out on the DPI as well. And then I included a couple of videos that help, you know, I explained it one way, oftentimes I need to hear things a few times and in a few different ways to kind of let it sink in. So there's a few videos that I've linked throughout the presentation that may assist in kind of understanding some of this content as well.
So those videos are on the next page that she had on the next slide. And I gave you a hard copy tonight. I will send you out the electronic version. So all you have to do is click on that and you can watch the video.
Great.
Versus having to try to type this stuff in. So,
Yes, if you click on these, that will pop up a video for you to watch. And I've got them on fund balance and aid and revenue limits and all of the topics we covered this evening.
that's the one.
So we're gonna have to somehow simplify some form of this when this
It'll be done in
referendum.
graphs,
Yeah,
and
right,
So this is, and this is just an example, I have access to this from my prior district, so, this was shared from Northern Ozaki School District because of the exact issue. How do you understand, anybody understand this whole thing? So,
right.
I pass this around, I have this and we can adjust it to be our district. And it kind of tells the story of 101, like we have here. So I'm just showing right now, Elise, what Josh had put together for Ozaki. It kind of goes through your basics of funding with some pretty simple charts and graphs. It goes through historical, this is the per pupil, so starting at 9,000, ending at
Okay.
11,000 here. Takes you through. It's got some of our historic, the general fund expenditures. So basically the story they were telling there is we're spending the same amount per pupil, getting the same amount as we were 10 years ago.
Okay,
What business is able to operate with that same metric? It's impossible. People don't function today as they were 10 years ago
right,
on the same numbers, but districts have been tasked with doing that. Then you look at your per pupil count, or the number of pupils in and out, so your resident district students. So we can create an entire flip book
yep,
that has all this information and make it available. It's on the website, we each have a copy, they're available in the office. This is the way I think you get the information out. And then you have conversations just like this with us, sitting at a table. And one of the things they did in our district, and here's the sad thing, all this work went in, it still failed twice in Ozaki by less than 50 votes.
wow,
So spreading the word is really critical because people function off of misinformation.
well, and that's the thing, we all need to send the same message and say the same thing.
Correct.
And if someone has a different understanding than someone else on
Right.
the board, then there's gonna be mixed signals going out and.
So this is this is a telling sheet that we put in that shows, these are all the districts, the turquoise, that have passed a referendum in the last 20 years. So
Operational referendum.
operational or facilities, because they sometimes, depending on what it is. So again, they've got, there's lots of ways, what's the impact to a yes vote or a no vote? Simple communications. And then the ballot question itself was listed in here, because part of this issue is the ballot questions are kind of wonky. I mean, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong,
Yep.
never met a ballot question that was crystal clear.
Right.
And they're hard because then in that moment, when you're making the vote, and then placement matters.
Right,
Our ballot question in Ozaki was placed just after a question about an increase in tax for ambulance. Horrible placement. So they increased their taxes for ambulance in Saukville, then they asked them about a school referendum. And people said, yes to this, because I'm gonna need an ambulance, no to this, my kid's not in school. So again, that's how placement matters too, and we don't have a lot of control over where it goes on the ballot, but we have a little control over the question, which we'll be voting on as a board.
so going forward, when we start talking, people are gonna ask, well, what happened last year? And I really think it would be beneficial to have 5 or 6 bullet points, and I know we've talked about this in the
Yeah, sure.
past, but bullet points, legal expenses was this much, salary increases went up this much. Inflation went up 20%.
Utilities or.
Utilities gone up. Just a handful of bullet points so people understand that, okay, I mean, this is legit. Okay, we missed a little bit in the budget process, so anyway, carry on.
I'm gonna dismiss Elise.
Yes, yes.
You can go hang out with your family. You did a wonderful
Yeah,
job.
thank you,
Thank you again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you, Elise.
So appreciate you, and we will let you go, and I'll talk more with you in the next day or two. So just.
Sounds good.
go feed your kids.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks.
Take care of that bird, I don't know, it sounds
Yeah.
like a bird.
Sounded.
I've had so many birds sitting around windows at home, and I'm just like, whatever.
I
They don't
heard a
even-
Zoom call.
So what is our budget timing? I mean, is it April to April, is it?
No, it's June 30th, or July 1st to June 30th is your fiscal year. And normally, and historically here, you guys haven't worked on your budget till August. That's going to change. You're gonna start working on the budget. We're already starting to work on some
I
of the
would
budget
hope so.
stuff. Well, but you have to understand that this is also a smaller operation, so it's not, in a school district in Cudahy, we would have been doing this in January and working towards every month presenting another section of the budget. Your budget isn't all that complicated.
No, I get that.
So, it goes a little bit quicker, but yes, you know, if we do this right, we start budgeting, conversations are happening in July, and, then you get into, your annual meeting, if it's set, I think it's set for August. So you're,
17th.
right, it has to be done prior to the annual meeting.
Yep.
So, at least a preliminary.
Yeah, so we started in a little different concept, but same concept of, budget. WVL has a March presentation in closed session usually, we go with the board, and we have here's where we're looking at preliminary costs for next year. April, we talk about teacher contracts, getting staff for next year, that's where your largest expense comes from. So we always have a closed session in in April, that talks about, here's what we're looking at for health insurance potential, predicted costs, the cost of raises and payroll, staffing, the needs of kids, et cetera. And then by the time May hits, you should sort of have a preliminary forecast. And then June and July, it's a matter of, tuning it up, making sure it's good. So by the time August hits, you've been talking about this enough since March to have your numbers pretty well actualized.
I mean, the budgeting process for the school should be pretty straightforward and level, almost from year to year, unless some big expense happens. But like businesses, oh my goodness, we're counting on new business and new big programs. You're gonna spend a lot of money and stuff like this year, not next year.
Well, some of the things that have
So
messed
it's
up,
different,
and
but-
you've been doing this longer than I, Jim, but some of the things that have messed us up in recent years were the ESSER funding became more of a harm than good, I think,
Yeah,
because it was money given in, and then the rule was, well, the state's not gonna give you any more money, because you got all this federal money coming in, use that first. Well, we've used, and many used it in different ways, of course, and now it's falling off, and there was this fiscal cliff that we've hit. Well, now you see it, it's all over the news, districts that are hitting the cliff and falling off the cliff, and
Oh, yeah.
they didn't plan for that next level of spending, and then you increase that, or add that to an increased health insurance cost,
Yep.
where we were looking at 40%, 30%, 20%, we came back this year here at 13.1.
Yeah.
Really,
So-
the ESSER funds essentially just allowed, if it fell within the buckets of how you could spend ESSER money, a way to cover pre-existing operational
Yeah,
Yes.
expenses, but allowed the district then to respond to inflationary things
Yeah.
that hadn't been previously been covered. So now you take those operational expenses that have been funded by ESSER, and you bring them back
Put
in,
it back on your books.
and you're essentially running the district off of the same funds as if there has been no inflationary pressures, health care pressures, benefits pressures, all of the things, right? Employee raises that we gave
Right.
to make up for previous times when we hadn't, because we'd shifted so many things operationally into the ESSER funds.
Is there a glossary of terms like, okay, Fund 10 is this, Fund 38 is this, Fund 41 is that?
Did she
Yeah.
give us that in
Yeah,
maybe one of the last
yeah, the last
presentations?
presentation
Yeah.
she gave us, and we can get it
Yeah.
again, and that will also be in the
Would we
book.
have it?
Yeah.
Other than I'm a dummy.
No,
No,
no, it was
it was
just,
just-
No, you're not.
it was a presentation from a couple of weeks ago.
Oh.
It's not like you haven't had to review a couple of things.
Yeah, so those are the things.
It might have
that'll
even
be-
been before you started.
Yeah, could have been,
Maybe.
Must have been.
so, but again, we can get you all of that information, and that should be included in the booklet for people to help understand what they're looking at
Yeah.
as well.
But some of those other important things are, understanding the mill rate and saying, hey, gosh, we've gone from a mill rate of, over $8, now we're sub $4.
Oh, yeah,
And that's wonderful to have, taxes that have
Right.
adjusted. And then there's even, in some of this is the one that's got a tax bill that gives you a couple of examples of people's tax bills and how Raymond shows up on their tax bill with a 28%, 26% tax change negative, which, again, people are gonna say, yes, finally. But at the same time, we have needs, and we've gotta somehow adjust the referendum, or not the referendum, the mill rate back up in a manner that is not gonna completely,
Well, but
Yeah, the
you
questions
can't,
are already
the only way to get the mill rate back up
Mm-hmm.
is by doing this operational referendum.
Oh, yeah, at this point, yeah,
But is there any other way to do it?
no. No,
A lot of questions.
Yeah, I mean, graduation parties, I was getting grilled the other night about it. So
Oh,
tell
yeah, I
me,
bet you
What
would.
are all the things?
well, and, and again, when I pointed to that slide about how you guys did that prepayment to get rid of your debt,
Yeah.
that was not a smart move.
correct.
At the end of the day, it looked like it was a smart move, but it wasn't a smart move from the standpoint of, if I'd have been your superintendent at the time, I would have said, let's take a look at that debt, and what part of that debt can we then refinance? What part can we send out further so we have less of the debt payment? And we can still keep that, it will go down.
Right.
But it'll go down slower.
It was so under the assumption that the
Community would pass that
the community
referendum.
would have passed that
Right, yeah,
referendum. As a, hey, thanks for paying that off early and saving us on interest.
Right,
Sure, we'll get
So
that
why did we
that
want a
passed.
$14 million, what justified $14 million?
There was a plan behind it that shows all of the things. There was a sketch, a
But-
concept, there was all of the
but
things.
it wasn't well
But it wasn't
communicated.
well communicated, and there were multiple reasons why. You can pay for all of that work to happen up front, and pay a company $80,000 to do that work, to give you a very structured, detailed plan. Or you could have the concepts put together by a company, then pay them once you get the general rough estimate identified, and then pay them to do that detailed plan afterwards. So they had ballparked,
What was the
given
big-
all of the
What was
requirements.
the big ticket item?
There was a lot in it, like it was.
Was this that
Well,
facility
We're
thing that
redoing
you?
the kitchen.
Rerouting how buses and cars come in via the.
There was
the
an,
5
offices
mile
were gonna be moved to that
Right.
side of the building.
Or
Classrooms
around DPW or
restructured,
something?
a lot of the non-compliant elements of
Well,
the
they were
school
right here.
have been fixed.
School facility
Bulletproof
improvement
glass.
plan, safety, security, building systems, infrastructure, ADA compliance, site
STEM room,
improvements,
yeah, I see that,
construction,
yeah.
STEAM lab, acquisition of furnishing, fixtures, equipment, kitchen, cafeteria, multi-use space, renovations.
Like our boiler, like all of the, and our,
Were we planning on spending 14 million in 1 year?
No,
No.
it was over a couple of years.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So
it was like a four.
the wish list that you're getting now, that we're talking about for facilities, a lot of those things were on that list of just replace it, get it done, and you have.
Well, now, okay, but, so 14 million, and that was to cover stuff for a number of years. Is that a way to go about it, or do you say, okay, let's do a 5 million this year, because this is what we're gonna do with it. Do 4 million next year, or 2
It's too hard,
million?
you can't pass.
You wouldn't be
So
able to pass it.
when,
Yeah, you need the whole plan.
right, and the other part of it is, and
Well, you're spending,
So-
you're paying interest on
Right.
money that you haven't used, and you may not use it for 4 years.
you're not paying, you're
No, you're,
you're
I mean,
investing.
it's a,
Because you're banking that money, the money comes at once.
overall, the construction is happening, and you're paying 14 million out at once.
Right.
And you're doing all the work at once. But it was to do it with the age of our facility and the number of things that were related, meaning like, okay, so do I reroute the offices over there, but then I have a plumbing thing, but I should probably do plumbing, like, there was this massive
No, I understand.
web that was woven. So it would have been one project all done at the same period of time, but you pay for it over the life of the referendum.
Right, no, I understand that, I'm just, at the time, you can't spend $14 million in 1 year.
Oh, yeah.
That's my point.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
On a building, I mean, in
Construction.
this community, on this building, it would be something that you'd have to obviously plan out and coordinate, but.
was that based on that study from that one company that?
It was partially based on, yeah, yep.
Because that came up at $2 million, I thought, from what I saw. Maybe I didn't read it right.
Yeah.
No, that was different.
That was just the study of the
ADA and
the
all
current
that stuff.
facilities. That wasn't talking about like the
Well,
relocating the offices, adding the steam lab. It wasn't any of that
Redoing
stuff.
the
It was
kitchen.
truly
So
like
need
the
to move?
boiler, the kitchen, freezer. It was like the actual, the building as it sits today, what repair was needed for it.
The lights are going.
The lights,
But the fund,
the cost price of
the
move.
Fund 10 referendum we're talking about right now is for operational costs.
right, I understand.
So if we're
Not,
able,
no upgrades.
well, it's not really upgrades, although if we are able to manage the budget well, you can put some monies away from.
That's a question though that I got at the graduation party. So will any of this go towards enhancing, like, will we not have sewer issues next winter? And I'm like, well, it's
No,
an operational
that's-
referendum,
you can't
that's
use it
not
for that,
covered by
though.
this, yeah.
No.
But you'll probably rob Peter to pay Paul and then use those funds to cover that.
Yes and no.
Well, the
Somehow.
$750,000 number though, does allow us to pay all of our debts and normal functioning bills, and there's money
It
left.
allows us to get closer to the 20%
For the fund balance.
fund balance that we are
Right.
targeting, which then will help us save on our short-term borrowing, and that comes at an expense to us. So then in theory, that $40,000 you're saving by not having to do the
Use for something
short-term
else.
borrowing could be
Use.
reallocated, yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, in that sense.
It's very convoluted, so.
It's a different way around to the facilities needs, for sure. The best facilities needs Band-Aid is the treatment of a facilities referendum that just
Yeah.
says we need all X, Y, Z. But we're not in a position right now for that.
Just so you know, Rick Peck, he's a local guy, his kids go to school,
He's come here and done our inspections, yeah.
he'll do it for nothing.
He's done it.
And I told him, no, we're not doing, no, that's not how that's meant to be, and that's not what we're asking. But he's definitely engaged, you know,
He was at the graduation party that I was at asking questions, so,
yeah.
yeah.
At this point, I think we're done with the meeting portion, so I'm gonna
Yep.
turn the live stream off.
All right.
Bear with me, and then I have 2 pieces of information to give you before you leave.
Okay, I'll go with
Okay, feel free.
Well, at least it's got the backside and this side.
I forgot.
Oh, that.
Here, this is yours, right?
Yeah,
Yes, so that's what I'll start working on,
yeah, start working on it.
I-
That's great.
right? I mean, let's get some tools in our hands.
Yeah.
And
Oh, absolutely.
Keep it simple,
then the interesting thing is, yeah.
Is that
walk them through
stuff
it.
like you were talking
Was
about
helpful.